So, I want to start out today with a story. And it's interesting to me if we look at all the religious traditions, they all have stories that we might learn from. But this story is a Russian folk tale. Long ago and far away, there was a little girl, and her name was Vasilisa. Sometimes she was called Vasilisa the Wise, but she was never called Vasilisa the Sad, even though her mother died when she was just 8 years old. Of course she was sad about her mother's passing, but she had fond memories of her mother too. Before she died, her mother called her daughter to her bedside and placed a doll in Vasilisa's hands. It was one that her mother had carved especially for her. And Vasilisa's mother said, "Take care of this little doll, and she will take care of you." Vasilisa took the doll and put it in her pocket, and on the day her mother passed away, despite all the tears that she felt, she remembered to take out the doll. And she saved a few crumbs from the cake that day and brought a little bit of tea. And she placed the doll on her pillow and gave the doll the cake and a sip of tea. And she told her troubles to her doll, ending with the question, little doll, what shall I do?" It seemed as though the doll's eyes shined like fireflies. It was as though the doll spoke and said just what her mother had always said. "Don't be afraid, Vasilisa. Be comforted. Say thy prayers and go to sleep. The morning is always wiser than the evening." And it was true. It was true. Things never seem so bad in the morning as they do in the evening. And every day from that point, Vasilisa would get some bread and a few raisins and a little tea and when she went to bed, and she would feed her doll and tell her doll all her troubles, and always ended with the question, little doll, what shall I do?" And talking to the doll always comforted her and gave her courage. Even when her father found a new mother for her who wasn't her real mother. Even when this stepmother gave Vasilisa the worst of chores. Even when her stepmother sent Vasilisa to fetch a new flame for the fire, and Vasilisa had to walk in the woods all alone, with creaking trees and dark shadows. But Vasilisa held her doll tight to her chest and found the strength to go on. Even when she arrived at a forest clearing at Baba Yaga's hut, which stood on chicken legs and was surrounded by a fence made of skulls and bones. Even when the horrid Baba Yaga appeared, crackling and spitting and scary. Even when Baba Yaga told Vasilisa if she wanted the flame for her stepmother, she would have to do endless chores and clean the house and the yard and make Baba Yaga dinner every night. And even when the horrid Baba Yaga demanded that besides her usual chores, Vasilisa do impossible things, like sorting the chaff from the wheat and the dirt from the poppy seeds. Baba Yaga was unhappy that Vasilisa managed all these impossible tasks. And yet, Baba Yaga kept her promise and gave Vasilisa the flame her stepmother wanted. She was only too eager to get rid of the child because Vasilisa's strength came from her mother's blessing, and this was not something that Baba Yaga liked to hear. When Vasilisa left, she carried the flame with her, and it allowed her to see with new eyes in the forest. And she realized the forest was not as dangerous as she thought it was. And she was no longer afraid. When she came out the other side of the forest, she saw her home with new eyes and realized it was her stepmother's home, not her home. And it never, ever would be. And so she walked right past it. She walked on and on until at last she came to the home of another woman, one who welcomed Vasilisa to live with her. The woman encouraged Vasilisa to care for the doll, taught her skills she needed to be happy, to find fortune. And still, Vasilisa every day took some bread and a few raisins and a little tea and brought them to her bed and fed her doll. And now Vasilisa not only tells the doll her troubles, but all the joys in her life. So, someone said to me that they felt I was brave because I stepped in front of the Miami-Dade School Board and spoke in favor of October being set aside for LGBTQ History Month. But I have to admit, I didn't feel brave. I was concerned, maybe a little afraid. You know, there were some Proud Boys there and Mothers for Liberty. But, you know, the thing is, I tend to think of courage in terms of some of the routine activities of life, rather than taking a public stand or speaking truth to power in a public setting. I think the courage it takes to learn to ride a bike. The first time, and you fall down, and the second time, and the third time. I tried many times, but I did eventually make it. Or the courage it took for me to ask my lovely wife to marry me, especially when she said, "What the heck are you doing?" You know, as a kid, I had to be courageous. My mom said, "You got to be courageous." When my toes were cut off by a lawnmower, not to worry, they're sewed back on. I'm all good. And as an adult, you know, I had to be courageous when Martha and I decided to have children, because I wanted to be a better father than my father was to me. These are the kinds of things I think that require real courage. The events of life that required me to show up and do something I didn't think I could do. I'm really sure that everyone here has had to be courageous at certain times in their life, certain situations, most times in the normal course of events of life. I invite you for a moment to think back on some of those times when you had to be courageous. What did you feel? How did you do it? You know, each of us feels a little afraid of something that another person might approach without a care in the world. We're all different that way. I, for instance, am afraid of heights. So when I was asked to climb up a telephone pole and jump off and grab a trapeze swing, needless to say, I was a little hesitant. My palms sweated so much, I don't know that I've ever experienced this before, but my palms sweated so much that they were dripping. One of the ways I deal with my fears is to do what I'm afraid of, at least once. I try not to let my fear keep me from doing whatever is before me. I think I should mention, and I think you could see there that, you know, I was strapped in, I had a safety harness, it was a ropes course. It was still a long way up, and yeah, anyway. But here's another thing I do. When somebody says to do something that I'm afraid of, I step right up and go first. I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but it seems to work for me. Being first in a difficult situation and intentionally not letting my fear stop me, well, that has been my coping strategy. It's helped me with roller coasters, rappelling, talking about my feelings, and other difficult activities. So think about how you cope with fear. And you know, you might remember the story, as I told earlier, of Vasilisa. She dealt with fear by holding on to her doll, the doll her mother gave her, holding it close to her chest, feeding it and talking to it. Now, this might seem like a child's way to cope with fear, but it did work for her. She had faith in the connection with her deceased mother that her doll symbolized. In my practice as a psychotherapist, I've certainly seen worse coping strategies than that. And I certainly pointed out to people when I thought their coping strategies were not that great. You know, alcoholism, drug abuse, porn, sexual addiction. You know, I think there are strategies that are problematic. And as we grow and mature, you know, many of us take the time to reflect back on our coping strategies, on the ways we get a little extra courage rather than, you know, drinking a glass of alcohol. Maybe there are other ways, things that we could do that help us get a little courage. We might reconsider the doll, for instance, and look for a different path. Something else that gives us a little extra courage. Perhaps exercise for some, meditation. Perhaps you have experimented with other spiritual coping strategies, behaviors, rituals, as time passed in your life. And so I wondered, as I was thinking about this service and about how we choose our spiritual coping strategies, the ones we use when we get to that place where we need a little help, A little help to feel that extra courage we need to follow through and do the thing that we know that we need to do. And as serendipitous as it might be, I attended a class this week, a class called Religionless Christianity, that gave me some insight. I'll talk more about religionless Christianity in a few moments and who that gentleman is up there. But I want to start with this. How do we consider the why and the how of faith? What do you have faith in? Because I think for many, what we have faith in, like Vasilisa had faith in her mother's love. What do we have faith in that helps us get that courage we need? We have to have from time to time when life presents us a conundrum. So, I ask you, think about your life right now, and where do you get that courage? What are the things you have faith in that helps you when you're needing a little extra courage? Do you get it from your friends or people in your life? Do you get it from a sense of divinity or a god or goddess? Do you get it from meditation or ritual or prayer or some inanimate object that you've infused with some significance? Well, this is Dedrick Bonhoeffer here. He was a German Lutheran pastor, a theologian, and an anti-Nazi dissenter during World War II. He was jailed for his dissension against the Nazis and was involved in a failed attempt to assassinate Hitler. He helped put together a plan in which somebody would take a suitcase and put it under a table where Hitler was talking, and the suitcase would explode and kill Hitler. I would say that in his life, Bonhoeffer, when he was young, found courage in his relationship with his personal God, the God of Christianity. Later in his life, his faith changed, and it was based more on his fervent and passionate belief that they had to get rid of Nazism and had to get rid of Hitler in particular. But here's the thing for him. Once he was imprisoned, once he had time to reflect on what it was that really held him together, that gave him that extra everyday courage he needed, his faith was transformed, and that in turn transformed him. You can find clues to his transformation in letters that were smuggled out of prison while he was there. He wrote such things as, "I am often reluctant to name the name of God to religious people. Religious people speak of a God as a point where human knowledge is at an end, or when human strength fails. Actually, it's a deus ex machina. In other words, to solve insolvable problems." This is an image of God out of the machine, which is that translation. The concept that God is somewhere out there and then comes swinging in to a person's life when something needs to be fixed or solved, something seemingly unsolvable, unfixable. This sense of God swinging in, people of various religions believe in. They use their faith and this belief to give them that courage to face difficult situations. The problem is when the unsolvable remains unsolved, or the fix isn't fixed. When the person dies anyway, or the person stays ill, or a hurricane doesn't change its trajectory at the last minute, this kind of faith breaks down, leaving the person without a coping strategy, vulnerable, fragile, without a foundation beneath their feet for what they are facing or what they might face in the future. While in prison, he also wrote, "We should find God in what we know, not in what we don't know." God wants to be grasped by us in unsolved questions, not in unsolved questions, but in those that have already been solved. This is the true revelation between God and scientific knowledge. But it is also true of the universal questions about death, suffering, guilt, I would add fear, and ultimately, from my perspective, the courage to face all of these. Looking at God through this lens, a personal God could be like Vasilisa's doll, something we infuse with meaning and purpose and significance. Not a handyman that comes in and fixes problems, but a faith, if you use the word God or something, a person, that grounds us in what is meaningful and important to us. It might be, for instance, values or principles or connection to a person or people or a community that is significant to us. Perhaps it could be a model of what Bonhoeffer calls religionless Christianity. What he means by that is using the life and teachings of Jesus as a model for living, something that you can turn to when you're unsure and afraid. A model that affirms what he was in his life and not his death or the meaning of his death. As Bonhoeffer reminds us, the religious act, which might be a prayer or meditation or a ritual, is always something partial, whereas faith is something whole and involves the whole person, the whole life. In other words, what we have faith in comes from the whole of one's lifetime, from the whole of one's experiences and relationships, from our lived connections with all that is around us. Bonhoeffer goes on to assert that our relationship to God, or at least a personal God as Bonhoeffer understands it, is no religious relationship to some highest, most powerful, and most imaginable, incredible, best being out there. That's not genuine transcendence. Genuine transcendence is not found in the infinite, but found in the neighbor within reach in any given situation. He is suggesting here that through our relationships with people, friends, family, the stranger who is within reach, we encounter the deeply spiritual, the meaningful, and the transcendent. These relationships are what we can have faith in. They are here and now and real. He concludes that we must recognize we have to live in the world etsi dus non daretur, as if God did not exist. He feels God compels us to recognize that. Thus our coming of age, we come into this age with a truer recognition of our situation before God. God would have us know that we must live our lives as those who don't have a God. According to Bonhoeffer, you must live your life as if God doesn't exist. Live your life without having faith in a God that's going to somehow come in there and make everything better. Live your life having a faith in yourself and in those around you and the relationships you have. So that you are the change that you seek to see in the world. Now, this may not seem like a novel concept to you, but in true Unitarian Universalist fashion, even as I embrace this kind of theology, I think that a sense of God or goddess or divinity is useful to some of us, or at least useful to me sometimes. And this is where Bonhoeffer's idea of religionless Christianity comes from. Religions can and will only see part of the truth of how the world works and how we can courageously face what life presents us. There is no perfect religion. There is no perfect God to have faith in any multitude of different situations. Religions have traditions, rituals, knowledge in which we can ground our faith sometimes, but not wholly, and not over a whole human life and all the experiences we have. All the world's religions are always partial. What we ground ourselves in, what we have faith in, what helps us in those times when we need that everyday courage needs to be fluid, needs to be responsive to whatever change is going on within us and around us, because everything, us included, changes. A rock that we might hold on to in one storm may only work sometimes and not in every storm. We may need many different talismans, rituals, traditions, dolls, people, gods, goddesses throughout a lifetime. And none of them will fix any of what we are called to face. There is no being out there that will do that. We use these rituals, traditions, dolls to help us to be a little braver when we don't think we're brave enough, so we don't feel ultimately alone, so that we have a little extra confidence, a little strength, a little courage when we need it. And so it's really helpful to build within ourselves a sense of resilience to face fear and anxiety by developing a rich, deep faith based on ritual, traditions, dolls if you need it, people, gods, goddesses, whatever that hold meaning for you. A few things. Whatever your faith, whatever you have faith in, here is a community where you can share that. And I think it's important to give it voice. And then to go out into the world and try to live that faith, to live with what you believe, what you hold as that you have faith in, see how it works. Come back and talk with us about that. And we'll share what our experience are of our faith and what we did in the world and how that worked for us. And we'll continue that process and continue it over a lifetime together. And each time we learn, we grow, we change, we understand, see the world differently. This is a faith that has real connections to the world, that includes people in your life and a sense of who you are, which is not static. Everyday courage is not something we find alone. There is much out there to help you find the courage you need if you but reach your hand out to another. If you but make time in your life to look within yourself to find what is meaningful and significant and transcendent for you that you can have faith in. For my friends, faith is not a static word, is not a noun, it is a verb. Go out and live it.